We just wrapped the interview with Kyle, and actually the ambient light levels have changed a little bit. We were fine for the entire interview, but I do want to talk to you about how Greg and I set everything up and the decisions that we made. So even though this seems minor, this is sort of one big change, which was when Kyle came in to stand in. We were standing in sort of, you know, I'm on the Apple box, Ben was in here, Greg was in here. But when Kyle passed, we had him stand here. And he said, you know, we usually have a barrel in the brewery. It's kind of a thing. Would it be cool if I had, you know, my beer on here? And I love the idea. So that got rolled in. We have that on basically the equivalent of 2 full Apple boxes. We got a couple of halves and a full, and we have that up here. That gives us a little bit of height. We knew the beer was going to be here, and then I was talking it out with him and Jack, and they mentioned the growler. Why not? So a growler gets set here. So we have a little bit of production design, and that's also important. It's something that people forget. You know, even in a small project, you need to think about the entire set. And so this was just sort of an addition to something that you didn't see earlier on. Now, from a key standpoint, I'm actually going to have Greg come in. We have that Q1000 from Felix, which is sort of a harder Fresnel light source that we have bouncing into a 4x4 frame into the DP kit off of white. Let's audition that on and off just so that people can see it. And again, the ambient light levels have changed a little, but the key is basically doing, if I was looking camera left, what we want it to do. So we're just going to turn that off.
Going off?
Yep. And let's go ahead and bring that back up.
Back on.
Good. Okay. That's our key light, and it's working, and it's creating a nice soft source. And the whole goal here is natural. We don't want to make it feel like it's lit. We just want to make it feel like we have natural light coming into the space.
Yeah, we did some negative fill behind, and we actually brought in a small white fill card just to give you a little bit back.
Right.
So to keep the sunlight from anything that was coming in on the left side of frame, and then but then also fill back in from our key source.
Yeah, so it's kind of doing 2 jobs here, this 4x4. It is doing 2 jobs. It's blocking the light, or the light that we had earlier on coming in through that skylight.
Right.
And it is creating a little negative fill by the nature of it. But then we felt that we wanted to get a little bit more light. You'll often see that when you're shooting interviews and you're doing a setup like this, sometimes you'll find that there's this little dark part right here. And Kyle had a little bit of that going on. He was also wearing glasses. So we brought this in to just give a little fill. And let's take a look at what it looks like when it's out. Okay? And then we bring it in again. And you can just see how that's poking in there a little bit. Some people don't need that at all. We might want to fill, but we don't necessarily need it for that job. But it just helps get into that little place, and I think that that's really important to look out for when you're shooting. There have been many times in history that I've regretted not setting up that little fill. And then I look in there, and it just seems really dark in that little spot on the fill side. Of course, our A and B cameras are shooting into the fill side. They're not on the key side because we don't want things to look flat. We already talked about that a little bit. I'm looking camera left. We have an A camera there, and that's our setup. And so I would be looking to Abby, who was conducting the interview. She was standing on the stairway over there. And then we have our B camera also on the fill side, and that's going in, and we have it on just a slightly different angle, a tighter shot for this particular interview. And we're looking into all of this. And again, ambient light levels have changed a little bit, but it's a really nice shot. And you can see it from the interview footage, and you can see what that camera is doing. We shot it at an f4. That's what we settled on. We also did a little bit of adjustment. We moved that key in just a little bit so we could bring our ISO down a little bit on the camera. And I tend to lean towards overexposing a little bit when shooting log, because I find that when we get into post and we start to adjust that exposure, that if you underexpose it, especially on the Cinema EOS cameras, you tend to see noise introduced in the shadows. So we'll definitely lift that up a little bit, and the end result is we're pushing the mids, especially the shadows down, and that's what we want to do. If we lift too much the image, then we're going to see a lot of noise in the shadows. I don't like that. So just a couple of other things. I've got my mic here. It's coming off of a stand, and the way Kyle was positioned, we were basically positioning it so we were recording in the lobe, not the axis of the mic. So if he moved around a little bit, we wouldn't have a drop in sound levels. That's really important when you have small crews and you don't have a sound recorder. So you've got to think about where it is. If you put the axis of the mic pointed right at the person's mouth, when they turn right or left, they're going to go off axis, and then the recording levels are going to dip and then come back up and dip and then come back up. But if you use the lobe, which is broader, pointed around here or down here, then when they move around, they're inside of the lobe, and you're going to be getting more consistent recording levels. So just another little tip, even though it's not lighting related. Back there, we have the Maverick, the remote phosphor light. It has a 5600K phosphor panel in it. And I'm just going to have Greg turn that off, or just, pan it, and we can see the difference. And let's bring that back in, and you can see it gives a little bit of a lift here. It's going to give a little bit of, separation. We don't always need that, but it worked well for this. And I'm just going to have you dim it and then bring it back up, and we can see what happens. Keep it in position, and let's just bring it up a little bit. And I'm not looking at the frame right now, but I just want to bring it up enough that it's doing a little bit, but I don't want to feel like it's lit. And that's, for me, the goal, at least for this particular setup and what we're doing. Because of the time of day that we have now, as opposed to when we shot it with Kyle, if I was doing the interview at this time, I think that Greg and I would have set up a background light to do some of what was happening naturally when we shot the interview with Kyle. And that would have been probably a broad source. Sometimes we like spotty sources in certain spaces and harder light, but just something to create more of the highlights and things that were going on in the space. We might have bounced it off of a big silver 4x4, which would have done really nice things in this space, or maybe just directly, depending on the light source that we use. But this is what we wound up with, and I think if you take a look at the interview footage, you'll see it looked good.